paradox.
Mm.
So firstly, thanks everyone for being here. We had hoped that this would be in person, but that was not to be due to strikes and cancellation of strikes and all of that. Anyway, so we'll, enjoy our time online. I'm so happy to welcome Dr. Heejung Chung to our departmental seminar series. I'll just introduce Dr. Chung briefly before giving her the floor. Dr. Chung is a professor of sociology and social policy at the University of Kent. She is a labor market and welfare researcher who focuses on a set of wide-ranging issues like flexibility at work, gender inequalities in the labor market, employment insecurity, and the mental load, as well as the division of paid and unpaid work at home. She is the author and editor of numerous articles, books, and edited volumes in venues such as, and I'm really going to cherry pick a few, Work, Employment, and Society, Gender and Society, and Human Relations. She is the author of the recent book, The Flexibility Paradox, Why Flexible Working Leads to Self-Exploitation, which she'll be telling us about today. I also just want to mention, outside her many research accomplishments, Dr. Chung is a talented musician. And during one of the lockdowns, I was delighted to listen to her singing a wonderful feminist sea shanty on mansplaining. Over to you, Heejung.
I thought you were going to talk about the fact that I'm in a punk band. I was like, you don't know, you haven't heard us play punk.
That I haven't heard,
or maybe
I have.
Have you seen, like, actually, for those of you who are in London, yeah, if you do get a chance to come and see us sometimes we do gig in London. So anyways, yeah, not as prolific as the academic work. So yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm really, I got it to not be there in person, but well, train strikes, but also I have a horrible cold, so it might be the best that I don't get you all sick. So I'm just gonna share my sorry, I just pressed the wrong button. Today's not the day for pressing buttons and things. Can you, I don't know why this is happening. Can you see this? Yes, great, thank you. So, oh, there it is. I don't know why. Okay, so bear with me. As I said, I was sick. I was in bed until on Sunday, and then Monday had to teach, but so I'm Heejung. I'm happy to be here. I'm going to do this presentation, and I'm hoping to do it for like half an hour or so, that to give us a bit more time to have some more discussion and stuff. I have to say, so yeah, this is a methodology department. So, and I was actually thinking, like, majority of what I'm going to say is actually has nothing to do with methodology, although there's a lot of empirical work that I do, and I do a lot of quantitative, but also qualitative research. And I'll kind of breeze through that bit. But I don't like, if anyone's interested in the methods that went into this work, you're more than welcome to ask me questions later on. But it's essentially this. I mean, I like to kind of start off with a question, and also kind of also try to relate to you academics, rather than you just kind of researching around the labor market stuff. So I mean, one of that is very common just myths about academics is that, oh, academics have all the freedom in the world, right? So they take long summers away doing nothing, and they don't do that much work. And this is some of the tweets that have been deleted by Andrew Adonis, is a labor lord. And I mean, Andrew Adonis has many merits, one of which isn't this. It's the fact that he just started a Twitter war in the summer of 2017, God knows for what reason, about how, oh, academics have 3 months summer holiday as sacrosanct, and that they don't even do much work. I know, because I was in Oxford and I didn't work so much, etc. I know that's, you can't relate to that, because majority of academics, especially potentially maybe you guys who are in like the more high esteemed universities, are notorious for working long hours. We have one of the worst working cultures in terms of long hours work, not taking breaks, not, working across the weekend, and also foregoing not just work-life balance, but partnership, children, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of data that exist in from the THE, the Times Higher Educated, and all sorts of other surveys that really puts us academics as one of the worst in terms of really having this kind of long hours, always available, always on, and also in a way kind of putting kind of everything above work above everything else in life kind of culture, right? And so that's what academics are. But what we realize is that And that's kind of perhaps one of the starting points of this whole long project. Do bear with me if I ramble on. I still have the cold, and I realize there's not a lot of blood flowing through my brains at the moment, so I will be rambling on a lot. But one of the things that you find is that these kind of patterns of that autonomy and freedom over work, not necessarily leading to the best work-life balance and actually leading to what I can, will coin as the self-exploitation, isn't something that is unique to academics. It is something that you find in a whole range of the population across the world. And I think one of the things that you do see is, especially during the pandemic, is the extent to which people found it really great, but also difficult working from home, because work and home boundaries blurred, and rather than it leading to, and what the popular myth is about you slacking off and watching daytime TV and home's under the hammer the whole day long, you end up actually eating up to your evenings and weekends doing the work, doing office or paid work. So that's what the flexibility paradox is about. Why, despite the fact that when people say working from home, especially pre-pandemic times, you assume that we see a lot of daytime TV, or as well, young kids would be Netflix. I'm just joking. That you end up with workers gaining more control and freedom over when and where they work. They end up working harder and longer and as flexible working, rather than enabling workers to work anywhere and any time, it actually ends up with workers working all the time and everywhere. So that's what the flexibility paradox is about, and that's what the book is about. Excuse me, this is going to be a great talk. The content of the book is like this. So there's a whole bunch of other things in there, right? But I have only 30 minutes, of which 10 minutes of which I rambled on about me being sick and not having enough brain power. So I'm going to just focus on a couple of things, and of which none of it is going to be about methods. Hey, so yeah, so I'm going to talk about what the flexibility paradox is, which I did, but I was like trying to explain why that happens, how that's gendered, and how it actually ends up not just being exploiting yourself, but also getting penalized in terms of careers, and maybe talk a little bit about what can we do about that. Before we go on, I think I need to talk about what flexible working is, because there's a whole range of things that could be considered flexible working. But in this case, I mean the workers' control over when they work. So like flexi time, so flexible starting end times of work. So you could start a bit early, end a bit early. So you don't have to stick to the 9 to 5, 9 to 6 pattern. Working time autonomy is what kind of academics have, where most academics have, where you could kind of work whenever, as long as you get the work done. Teleworking or home working, it's just working from home or outside your normal working space during the normal working hours. So that doesn't necessarily mean, but it can also include, when you take work home and then do additional work. But strictly speaking, more here is about being able to work from home during your normal working hours. If you look at the proportion of workers working flexibly, this is pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic cross-national data will be coming soon from the Working Conditions Survey, but it's not available yet. But just to give you a flavor, about 25% of workers across Europe had flexible schedules. So 20% had flexi time, 6% had working time autonomy. The UK is slightly higher than that, but you can see like in countries like Sweden and Denmark, that proportion is more than half the population. About teleworking, so about 1 out of 5, 1 out of 6 workers had the ability to work kind of outside the office. If you go strictly into working from home, that's about 1 out of 7 or 8 workers. And again, UK is a bit higher. And you can see that in countries like Sweden and Denmark, the Nordic country, that proportion is much higher. And of course, this all changed during the pandemic. But one of the patterns that I can say still exist is that there is huge cross-national variations. UK did really well in terms of home working during the pandemic. One of the reasons because we just dealt with the pandemic very badly, so we had to work from home. But also you see that a lot of the Nordic countries really, the home working has been really pushed much further in those countries compared to, let's say, Southern or Eastern European countries. Okay, now to the crux of the whole thing. What is the theory of the flexibility paradox? So why is it that workers, when getting more control, having that freedom to work whenever and wherever, actually end up exploiting themselves? What is the reason behind that? So So if you draw from the Kelly and Anderson study, so what they've done is look at UK organizations, was specifically pertaining to part-time work and teleworking in this case, but some of the theories can be applied to the flexible working that I'm talking about. One is the imposed intensification, and this is something that you might be familiar with. So one of the things you see is that when you blur boundaries of working time, so it's like, oh, it doesn't matter when you do it, just get the work done. And then the work becomes more project-based. And then what happens is that employers could actually add additional work without the boundaries of working time. So there's no overtime because you just get the work done. And this is something what happens a lot with academic contracts. I don't know how LSE is, but at least we don't have working hours in our contract. So it's really tough to say, work to contract, because a contract doesn't actually have clear working hours. But then what that does is it actually you could add more work to it without going against any labor laws, because there's no boundary time that you have to have protected. So that's one thing. So imposed intensification, kind of adding more work through the back door. Social exchange theory is slightly different. As I've shown that, flexible working was widespread, but still not as widespread to the point that it's kind of a norm. So what happens in these cases is that when you get the gift of that freedom over when and where you work, you have to kind of give back because you're afraid that it's going to be taken away. And this is especially the case, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, about there was still, especially pre-pandemic times, and even now, there's still like a misconception about flexible working. So if you don't work 9 to 5 and if you work from home, you're not really working. You're kind of slacking off. If you're in the office, yeah, you're a great worker and you work long hours, you're a great worker. But when you're like working from home, like, are you really working? I can't see you. Managers feel like, are you really doing the work? So what you do is you kind of overcome some of that stigma, some of kind of also to reciprocate for the gift of flexible working, you work harder and longer. And again, I'm just going to skip that. The enabled intensification is slightly different, even different from that. So it's like, essentially, when you work from home, you have fewer distractions, you're able to work hard. And, you don't have people knocking at your door and asking you for stuff. And you don't have to commute, so you feel less fatigue. So you might be able to work harder and longer, and also reduce absenteeism and sickness. So for example, if I had to come and talk to you in person, I might not have gone because I wouldn't have dared to done the train commute up to London. Whereas because we're doing it online, hey, I just kind of rock up, wearing a nice top, and I could be here, right? So that's kind of one of the things you can see as an example here. Now, I wanted to kind of take these theories a bit further, because I think there was a pattern that we see, which is kind of like enabled intensification or even like social exchange theory. But one of the patterns you see, and this is not just my observation, but comes from Masmanian et al. Putnam and Pongratz and Voss, sociologists, also kind of organizational studies people. They find that a lot of companies, what happens is that with the rise of flexible working, there was also a change in the organizational and professional cultures where it was now increasingly becoming a norm to be always on, always available. So we're talking like pinging, emails at 8, 9 o'clock in the evening and getting the response back within 5, 10 minutes on a weekend, on a Sunday evening. And those kind of patterns has to do with the fact that digital technologies has developed, as well as well, also flexible working. So rather than flexible working kind of enabling workers a better work-life balance, what they find is that it results in workers using that freedom to enhance the competitive edge, to be always on, always available, especially because that's what was necessary to seem professional, to maintain a certain level of professional reputation. So it ends up with really becoming a vicious cycle of increased competition within the organization or that profession. And sometimes that has been accelerated by the fact that organizations actually encourage that kind of behavior by introducing also things such as performance-related pay, but also much more regular monitoring and performance monitoring of workers individually, as to really increase that competitiveness. And one of the things I wanted to contribute to this debate was that why this happens and how this happens, and not just in, as Mazmanian or Putnam has like observed, in these very particular high-end knowledge work-centered professions, but across the labor market, which is something I'm going to show you later on in the empirical evidence, that these kind of paradoxes, or the autonomy control paradox or the flexibility paradox, isn't necessarily limited to just academics or let's say bankers, or it's people working in the financial sector, but something that we observe across all workers, right? And I want to bring two kind of themes into here. One is about passion, and the other is about insecurity. The passion bit is that the idea of sex, the idea that we've essentially internalized capitalism now. What that means is, so we are now individuals where everything we do, and embedded in our own psyche or self and our own minds, that everything we do is an enterprising adventure. So I think some of you might have heard about like Me Inc. Like I am a brand, and as academics, you're probably very aware of this, because you don't necessarily work for LSE, like you are your own brand. So you are Aliyah Rao, like I'm like whoever you are, that you are your own brand, and everything you do, everything including like the time you rest, you go do your sports because to make you more productive, everything you do now is something that has to contribute to the ideas of being productive at work and being more sellable, marketable in the labor market, or in the, let's say, academic market, if you want. So in that context, you don't need managers to control workers, because workers do that for themselves much more efficiently. And you see this because also, so some of the manifestation, I guess, of this is that, so we see busyness as a badge of honor. So you ask people, oh, how are you? How are you doing? And you say, oh, I'm busy. Why? Because it's a confirmation of self-worth. If you're not busy at work, that means you are not of value. You are not worthwhile engaging in. And you see that a lot of the kind of time use studies, but as well as psychological studies, social psychologists have shown how, if you do experimental studies around like busyness, that if you don't feel busy, you feel like people are going to judge you for not being valuable, but you also judge yourself, so that you put your worth down if you're not busy. So that is kind of one of the manifestation. Another thing, again, I guess an example and evidence of this whole internalized capitalism is about passion, about how we focus on passion at work, and how we have to be considered, passionate at work. And job is no longer a way to earn a living, but it's kind of seen as self-fulfillment. And if you don't think of it like that, then you are seen as, again, not worthwhile in society, that you are devalued. This is just a graph to show you the extent to which this occurs, not just necessarily in the managerial professional occupations, but across all occupation. This is from the International Social Survey Program. The year I forget, and I do apologize. This is an example of how bad graphs look like. You should have a source and everything, but sorry, but just to give you an idea of that. And the problem with that is the passion's great, yeah, passion's great, but also you have to understand passion can be a really double-edged sword, in the sense that when you have passion, you could exploit yourself much better, because the idea is that passion exploitation theory is saying how, if you're passionate at work, then you don't need any financial remuneration or other remuneration, because you being able to do what you love is remuneration enough. So for example, you don't pay artists, musicians a lot of money because you like playing music. Why do I need to pay you for doing something what you love? It goes even to NGOs and academics as well. A lot of us do this for social justice reasons. And once you do have that, and it becomes like social justice has become the goal of your work, then why do you need remuneration? Like being able to do the social justice should be remuneration enough. And that is the problem that you see in this context. And in that context, flexible working, rather than being an enabler in terms of work-life balance, actually exacerbates a lot of the problems and the patterns of those work cultures, where it just adds to us exploiting ourselves much better than we used to, so to say. The second context is insecurity, and those two things are very, go hand in hand. The collective bargaining power of unions and workers have declined. The welfare state has declined in terms that it no longer provides job guarantees, no longer provides full employment or income protection. And this is why we see a rise in job status and income security. What is more, it's that the state has enabled through changes in a lot of the welfare state policies, such as the introduction of workfare, welfare to work, that it pushes individuals to need to see themselves as workers first rather than citizens first, and that you are essentially the person who is responsible for any labor market and other income insecurity risks that you face. So we're talking about recommodification of labor, just using some of the terms from Polanyi and Esping Anderson, and where the kind of, and using kind of Bauman's work, that precarity and insecurity has led to a system of self-control, that you are seen to be in control of any kind of insecurities that you have. So in these cases, people have no other option but to use the flexibility at work to actually increase their competitiveness, because there's a looming sense of doom, like in your job. And of course, the rise in precarious jobs in the labor market, again, good example, academia, where there's a lot of temp jobs and 0 hours contract. You see that in a lot of studies where those kind of insecurity will impact not only those who are in insecure jobs, but also those in permanent contracts, because that insecurity kind of filters through to those insecure positions, feeling that this insecurity can affect them in the later run, or be used as some sort of way to kind of make people kind of work harder, so to say. Another aspect of insecurity, which I don't really explore in the book, but I would like to explore a bit more, is about this ideas of insecurity in terms of competition, like losing your position in the kind of metric society where you're constantly evaluated and compared through a whole range of things. So we're talking, in academia, especially like H indexes, Google Scholar citations, and out matrix, or Twitter followers, etc. And that in that sense, you're also insecure about losing kind of the top positions, which again helps us explain why flexible working kind of can lead to further exploitation. Anyway, so what's the evidence on this? I was like, okay, you did the talk, now show me some numbers. So what I will say is that all of my, all of my papers that I cite here are available open access online. So I encourage you to look them up. But what I will say is that, so I have done work with colleagues using the German household panel data, using longitudinal data to track workers of what happens when they gain flexible working, if they work longer hours. And yes, they do. We did the same thing with the UK household panel study, and voila, you get this kind of same effect, that you workers who have flexible working, that gain flexible working opportunities, end up doing even more unpaid overtime. And colleagues have done some other studies similar using telework, where it says, teleworking leads to longer overtime hours. Others have done really cool experimental studies using workers who are on routine contracts, so routine work. So rather than these professional workers, like what happens? Oh, by the way, just to let you know, these kind of patterns in terms of like flexible working leading to longer overtime hours, longer unpaid overtime hours, isn't necessarily only for professional. We do find this for a larger group of population. But also, I just thought these experimental studies are really cool, because it really helps us kind of hone in on the causality issue. And you do see that actually, yes, so they use call center workers and very routine work, and these kind of patterns of the like work leading to longer hours or more work held for these workers as well. Also, there's patterns of flexible workers doing more multitasking and mental spillover. So we're more likely to think about work and work during free times. This is from the European Working Conditions Survey that I did. Sorry. Okay. So one of the things we do find in across the board is that there are gender differences. So women don't do as many overtime hours when they work flexibly. And then you have to say why. And it's like, oh, are women not as much affected by this flexibility paradox? And then you have to put the gender perspective in here. It's like, it is the inadequacy of androcentric definition, essentially, in other words, just start looking at hours, not work hours, not just paid working hours, because unpaid work is still work. Going back to Foucault, I don't know if I want to go into too much detail, but essentially I'll just say this, is that in the culture of intensive parenting, which is, from the 1990s onwards, where it was expected that parents spend a lot of time educating, stimulating children, because around the 1990s, a lot of kind of brain research said, oh, you have to speak to your children when they were babies, otherwise your babies are not going to have cognitive development. Or if you do speak to your babies and then they're younger, that's going to help them foster into great adults. And then this is when we started looking at parenting differently, childhood differently, and we have a rise of what we call intensive parenting. And what has happened is that there was just an assumption that mothers, especially middle-class, higher educated mothers, but all mothers spend more time with their children, enriching their activities. And this is why we see that housewives in 1960s spent less time with their children than full-time working mothers in 2000s. Why? Because the mothers in 2000, even if you're working full-time, there was some sort of expectation to really engage with children. Otherwise, you're considered being neglectful. And this is why we're in that context. When women work flexibly, they do more overtime and they do more unpaid overtime, but not as much as men. But what they do is spend way more time doing unpaid housework. So you see, again, using all sorts of longitudinal kind of studies across the US and UK and Germany, where women not only do, but they are expected to do by their partners, by even like other family members, neighbors even, and interestingly enough, the children themselves, to be more available when they work flexibly, when work from home. So they end up working more, spending more time doing housework and childcare when they work flexibly. And this is what the exploitation model is. It's something that's been said by feminist scholars before. Sorry. Where on one hand, flexible working is fantastic because it helps mothers who were once unable to take part in the labor market to maintain their labor market positions after childbirth. So if you allow women to work from home or work flexi time, they're better able to maintain their hours and not work part-time, which ends up with career penalties if they are able to work flexibly. After childbirth, they're able to kind of maintain their high-paying, lucrative jobs. The problem is flexible working also enabled household to maintain that unequal division of household labor, where women are doing the bulk of the housework and childcare without any question. So what it ended up doing is that flexible working enabled mothers to kind of expand the 24 hours of their day to fit in as much childcare, housework, and as much paid work as humanly possible, sacrificing their personal leisure time and sacrificing a lot of kind of mental health and physical health of mothers, which increases the total necessary work of mothers, but not necessarily that's the same, that you don't see the same patterns of fathers. So essentially, we ended up using flexible working for freeing up female human capital for free without the disruption of the norm about who the worker is, in terms of it being based in the kind of 1950s, 60s male breadwinner model, nor did we disrupt the norm about how unpaid work, domestic work, should be divided amongst heterosexual couples, which is mostly women doing most of the work. On that happy note, we could talk about flexibility stigma. I'll just kind of show you this so that you can read through it. But I mean, flexibility stigma is like this. It's like, when people work from home, they don't really work. They go to the fridge, nibble off a little bit of cheese. They come back and then do a little bit of work, but then they go back and have coffee and they forget what they were doing by this guy. Get that we don't have to see his face so much anymore. But hey, it's that flexible working still comes with the stigmatized view that if you're working from home, you're not as productive or motivated as those who come into the office. Unfortunately, so the pandemic has changed that view a little bit, but it hasn't really disrupted it to the extent that it hasn't eliminated it. And the question then becomes, if people do think that way, like, is that going to be equal across the board, or do we see differences across who's flexible? Because if who's flexible working is going to be penalized more is a question. And there's two schools of thoughts around this. But what I'm saying is women are more mothers, especially, so with gender, parental status, but also I think race, disability, and other statuses matter when these things happen, because if you think a certain group of workers are not going to be committed and motivated, and they're not in the office and you can't micromanage them or you can't see them work, it's going to be worse. And that's some of the evidence that we do see, not just from my own work, but from others, where mothers flexible working seems to be more penalized. And sometimes fathers, when they were from home, and fathers working flexibly, especially when they say they do it for care purposes, sometimes it's evaluated even more positively, because it seems like, oh, you're such a great father, and then you get what you call like a badge of honor. No, something else. Yes, I think so. Yeah, fatherhood badge of honor. So that's what I wanted to say. Women are likely to face career penalties when working flexibly, despite the fact that they exploit themselves both at home and in the labor market. And that actually relates to the fact that why a lot of women pre-pandemic times has changed a little bit, but still there's a kind of, managers are much more hesitant to let women especially work from home, because they feel like you're not going to actually adhere to the that you're going to work as hard as when I can see you and monitor you type of thing. Okay. I'm gonna kind of skip to the context thing. Essentially, I in the book I talk about, that this doesn't happen all the time. This happens in countries, where, that's the culture of work culture, or the culture of neoliberalism, gender norms, family policies, workers' bargaining positions all matter. So if you work flexibly in the US and the UK, or in like Korea and places like that, that's going to be different when you work flexibly in Sweden and Denmark. So essentially, it's a lot of these paradoxical patterns, or a lot of these kind of unintended negative consequences are really going to be the case in certain countries like the UK, because of the cultural and structural issues that we have here. The final things I wanted to say was about, so what should we do about it? But I'm going to skip that because I want to kind of go into the question and answers, but we could come back into it when we want to. But, essentially, what I'm screaming here and in the book is essentially saying, like, we need to change gender norms. We need to have stronger rights for flexible workers, right to disconnect. And essentially kind of like, we need to start rethinking about work, what is work, but also how much work should be the focus of our lives. Essentially, we should work less is what I'm trying to say, collectively as well as individually, which is great, talking to a group of academics who are infamous for working 70 plus hours a week. Yeah, like work less is kind of what I wanted to say, but also just this, like, rest is a form of resistance. This is from Tricia Hersey, the NAP minister, if you want, that she always say, you are divine, and you existing is enough, and thank you for existing. So take home message. So what I'm trying to say in this 35 minutes of rambling was to say that flexible working is seen as some of a magic bullet in many cases by companies, by governments, etc. And I think especially the pandemic has let us know that that's not necessarily the case, that it comes with lots of problems, a lot of unintended issues that we may not have thought of. And one of the reasons why that happens is because it's an amplification. It's kind of it's a speaker. No, not what do you call it? These microphones where it amplifies some of the problems in our gender work culture and welfare states. And it has the potential to solve many problems and create equal opportunities for many, enables the, better access to work for many workers, but it actually can really pose a lot of problems. And to be able to use flexible working better, which again, I'm a real strong supporter and proponent for flexible working, is that we have to start dismantling the ways of working, work-life balance, and gender culture to overcome some of those negative consequences. Okay, and that is it. And here is a discount code. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Heejung.